Brain lecture script, Freud's Theory of Personality for Social Work Understanding. Professor Anderson, Department of Social Welfare? Today, we will explore Freud's theory of personality, one of the foundational frameworks for understanding human behavior. While Freud's theory has been controversial and is often critiqued in modern psychology, it remains a powerful tool for understanding the complexity of the human psyche. As social workers, we must understand the psychodynamic forces underlying problematic behaviors, and Freud offers a robust framework for doing just that. Let's begin by correcting a common misconception. The ego follows primary process thinking and the pleasure principle. That is false. It is the ID, not the ego, that follows the pleasure principle and engages in primary process thinking. The ID is instinctual, entirely unconscious, and operates from birth. When you're hungry and an image of food suddenly pops into your mind, that's the ID at work. In contrast, the ego operates under the reality principle. It mediates between the ID and the superego and tries to negotiate with external reality. The ego is rational, problem-solving, and engages in secondary process thinking. The superego is not the executor of behavior. The superego internalizes morals and ideals, reflecting the rules learned from parents and society. The ego constantly manages tension between the impulsive demands of the ID and the moral standards of the superego. When this conflict intensifies, anxiety arises, and the ego attempts to manage it using defense mechanisms. Now let's briefly review Freud's two key models, the topographical model and the structural model. The topographical model divides the human mind into the conscious, preconscious, and unconscious. The conscious contains our current thoughts and feelings. The preconscious holds memories that can become conscious with effort. The unconscious is a deep realm of repressed desires, memories, and emotions. The structural model describes the functional structure of personality, the ID, ego, and superego. These are not separate entities, but interacting forces that shape human behavior and personality. The ID follows instincts and seeks pleasure. The ego considers reality and seeks to maintain balance. The superego strives for moral judgment and ideals. These internal dynamics can sometimes lead to neurosis. For instance, when the ego fails to manage conflict effectively, anxiety intensifies, and defense mechanisms become overused. This may result in psychological symptoms such as obsession, repression, or transference. This is why this theory matters deeply for social workers. We must be able to look beyond visible behavior and grasp the unconscious motivations beneath it. The more we understand, the more effectively we can intervene and empathize. Next session, we will explore Erikson's psychosocial theory. He expanded Freud's ideas by introducing a model of personality development that includes social context and stages across the lifespan. Please read Chapter 3 in advance. Come prepared. Thank you.
Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take your source material and really dig into what you need to know. Today we're plunging into Sigmund Freud's work.
Yeah, specifically his, foundational theory of personality. Still debated, definitely.
Very much so. We're working from a lecture script today and some summary notes, all focused on, how Freud's ideas help understand why people do what they do.
Especially when behaviors become, let's say, problematic. It looks at the psychological dynamics underneath.
So our mission here is to pull out the real core concepts. We're talking ego, superego, that structural model.
And the topographical one, too: conscious, preconscious, unconscious.
Right, and see why this framework, despite, all the critiques, still offers a pretty powerful lens for looking beyond just what we see people do.
Yeah, getting at those hidden motivations.
And let's jump right in with something key from the notes, a common mix-up.
Oh yeah, the ego and the pleasure principle.
Exactly. It's not the ego that's running on that pleasure principle, seeking immediate gratification with that primary process thinking.
No, absolutely not. The source is really clear. That's the ID. Pure instinct, wants it now, illogical, fantasy-driven, that's the ID.
Okay, good. Got that straight. So if the id is that impulsive part and the ego isn't that, then what are these forces exactly? And why are we still talking about this model?
Well, like you said, it's controversial. Our notes definitely acknowledge the criticisms from modern psychology, no question.
Right.
But they also stress that it provides this robust framework for understanding the sheer complexity of the mind.
Complexity, right. It helps look past the surface stuff.
Yeah, to consider the sort of psychodynamic forces that might be driving problematic behaviors. It's a way to think about internal conflict.
Internal conflict. Okay, that feels central. So Freud wasn't saying personality is one solid thing.
Nope. More like the outcome of these three forces interacting constantly. The I, the ego, and the superego.
Not like actual parts of the brain we can point to.
No, more like conceptual forces. They're in this dynamic relationship, sometimes working together, often, well, clashing. And that shapes who we are and what we do.
Got it. Let's break them down. Start with the I'd. What do the notes tell us?
Okay, the I'd. It's described as completely instinctual, totally unconscious, and it's there right from birth. It's the basic engine, you could say.
And this is the home of the pleasure principle we just mentioned.
Exactly. Immediate satisfaction is its only goal. Wants what it wants now.
Like the hunger example in the notes.
Perfect example. You're hungry, the I'd screams, food, maybe even flashes images of food in your mind, doesn't care if there's actually food around or how to get it.
That's the primary process thinking.
Yeah.
Illogical, fantasy-based.
Precisely. Pure drive, disconnected from reality.
Okay. So if the I'd is like this demanding toddler, the ego sounds more like the stressed-out adult trying to manage things.
That's not a bad analogy, actually. The ego is described as the rational part, the problem solver. It's the mediator, really.
Mediator. And it operates on the reality principle.
Right. Which means it tries to satisfy the id's urges, but in ways that are, realistic and socially okay.
So it had to deal with the outside world.
Definitely. It uses what Freud called secondary process thinking, logical, organized, based in reality, to figure out how to meet those needs effectively. It's constantly juggling.
Juggling what?
The id's raw demands, the constraints of the real world, and also the rules coming from the superego.
Ah, right, the third one. The superego, the internal rule book.
Pretty much. It internalizes the morals, the values, the shoulds and should-nots we pick up, mostly from parents and, well, society.
Our conscience, basically. Striving for ideals.
Yeah, it pushes for moral perfection, for following the rules. It holds the ideals.
Okay, so it wants pleasure, superego wants perfection, and the ego is stuck in the middle trying to broker a deal that works in the real world.
That's the core dynamic, yes. But the notes make a good point. The superego sets the standards, but it doesn't do anything.
It doesn't execute the behavior.
No, that's the ego's job. The ego has to figure out how to act, taking the superego's judgments and ideals into account, along with the id's demands and reality. The superego is more the judge and idealist.
Okay, that clarifies the structure. Id, ego, superego, those interacting forces. But Freud had another layer, right? The topographical model.
He did. It's about levels of awareness, how accessible things are in the mind. He divided it into 3 levels.
Conscious, preconscious, unconscious.
Exactly.
Conscious seems simple enough. It's what we're aware of right now. These thoughts, these feelings.
Yeah, your current focus of attention.
Then the preconscious.
That holds stuff that's not in your awareness right now, but you can pull it up pretty easily if you try.
Like what I had for lunch yesterday. Or my address.
Perfect examples. It's accessible memory, basically.
The unconscious. This is the big one. The really Freudian concept. The hidden depths.
It really is. Think of it as this deep well holding desires, memories, feelings that are actively repressed or maybe just never became conscious. They're outside awareness, but still influential.
And the id lives entirely down there.
According to the theory, yes. But, and this is important from the notes, parts of the ego and superego operate unconsciously too.
Ah, so it's not just the id lurking down there. Our rational processes and our morals are also partly hidden from us.
Right. They have unconscious roots and influences that shape our behavior without us realizing it.
Okay, so we've got these 3 forces, id, ego, superego, playing out across these different levels of awareness. What happens when they, don't get along, when they clash?
Well, that's where the internal conflict really heats up. The clash between the id's impulses, the superego's restrictions, and the ego trying to manage it all in reality, that creates tension.
And that tension feels like?
Anxiety. According to the framework, significant internal conflict manifests as anxiety. It's like a signal that the system is under stress.
The ego's alarm bell.
You could say that. And the ego's main tool for dealing with this unpleasant anxiety. Defense mechanisms.
Ah, okay. Things like denial, repression.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Projection, rationalization, all these unconscious psychological tricks the ego uses to try and reduce the distress, often by, distorting reality a bit.
But what if that doesn't work? If the conflict is too strong or the defenses aren't cutting it?
Then the anxiety can persist, maybe even get worse. And if the ego relies too heavily on defenses or uses them in really rigid, unhelpful ways,
They become part of the problem.
they can, yeah. Instead of solving the underlying issue, they just kind of paper over it. And that whole dynamic can lead to what Freud and others historically called neurosis.
And the source notes mention symptoms that can come out of this, like obsessions or maybe repression itself becoming noticeable or transference in therapy.
Right. It's about how that unresolved internal mess starts to leak out, basically, into observable thoughts, feelings, or behaviors.
Okay, we've laid out the structure, the levels, the conflict, the anxiety, the defenses. So let's bring it back to the listener. Why should you care about this, frankly, quite old theory?
Our source material really hits this hard. It argues that understanding this model helps us look beyond visible behavior.
Meaning?
Meaning, instead of just reacting to what someone does or even seeing a pattern, it gives you a way to think about the unconscious motivations beneath it. It encourages a deeper why.
Asking why beyond just the obvious situation or trigger.
Exactly. And having that perspective, that way of thinking about hidden forces, the note suggests, can lead to more effective help, if needed. And also, maybe just as importantly, foster deeper empathy.
Empathy for ourselves, too.
Absolutely. For understanding our own confusing reactions sometimes, and for making sense of others when their behavior seems, well, irrational or just hard to grasp. It gives a language for the internal world driving the external actions.
It definitely offers a different way to frame things. This has been a really useful deep dive into Freud's core ideas on personality.
And the notes do sort of point towards a next step, mentioning Erik Erikson's psychosocial theory.
Right, building on Freud, but bringing in more social context development across the whole lifespan.
Yeah, taking these internal dynamics and seeing how they play out in the wider world over time could be interesting for a future exploration.
Definitely something to consider. So, to wrap up our Freudian exploration today, maybe leave you with this thought.
Okay.
If, as this theory suggests, a lot of what drives us, our impulses, our anxieties, even our morals to some extent, operates unconsciously, guided by forces we aren't really aware of, then how much conscious, deliberate control do we actually have over why we do what we do? And if that's potentially true for us, what does that imply when we try to understand someone else's actions, especially the ones that baffle us?
That is quite a thought to chew on. A question about control and understanding, really.
Indeed. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
안녕하세요. 오늘은 보내주신 프로이트 성격 이론 자료들, 그 강의록이랑 노트를 가지고 좀 더 깊이 파고 들어볼 시간입니다. 프로이트가 말한 그 인간 행동의 근본적인 원리들 한번 제대로 살펴보죠. 특히 원초와 자아, 초자아, 이 성격 구조랑요. 또 의식, 전의식, 무의식, 이 마음의 지도 모델, 이걸 명확히 이해하는 게 오늘 목표입니다. 사실 비판도 많잖아요. 그런데도 이 이론이 왜 여전히 중요한지 그 핵심을 찾아보겠습니다.
네, 맞아요. 프로이트 이론하면 논란은 항상 따라다니죠. 하지만 이 자료들에서도 잘 나와 있듯이 우리 행동 이면에 있는 그 보이지 않는 힘, 동기, 이런 걸 생각하게 만드는 데는 정말 강력한 틀이에요. 특히 좀 이해하기 어려운 행동들이요.
재밌는 게 자료에서 흔한 오해부터 딱 짚고 넘어가더라고요. 자아가 쾌락을 쫓는다는 거요? 그게 아니라고.
바로 그러죠. 그 즉적인 만족 추구, 비논리적인 환상 같은 거. 그건 1차 과정 사고라고 하는데 이건 자아가 아니라 전적으로 원초화의 특징입니다. 자료에도 명확히 나와 있죠. 배고플 때 그냥 음식 이미지만 떠올리는 것처럼 현실은 상관없이 그냥 욕구 충족만 바라는 거예요. 원초화는.
아하, 그럼 원초와 자아, 초자아, 이 셋이 정확히 어떤 역할들을 하나요? 이게 왜 중요할까요? 자료 보니까 이게 뇌의 특정 부위가 아니라 그냥 상호작용하는 휜들이라고. 꼭 우리 안에 막 떼쓰는 어린애, 원초아랑 그걸 달래는 어른, 자아, 이 같이 있는 느낌이네요.
네, 정확해요. 원초화는 태어날 때부터 있는 본능 덩어리예요. 완전 무의식적이고 오직 쾌락 원칙만 알죠. 반면에 자아는 현실 원칙을 따라요. 합리적으로 문제를 해결하고 중재하는 역할이죠. 그러니까 원초화가 이거 해줘 하면 자아는 지금은 안 되고 이렇게 하면 가능할지도 하면서 현실적이고 사회적으로 괜찮은 방법을 찾는 거죠. 이게 2차 과정 사고고요.
자아가 정말 바쁘겠네요. 원초화랑 현실 사이에서 계속 줄타기를 해야 하니까.
그렇죠. 그런데 여기에 또 초자아가 끼어들어요. 이건 이제 부모님이나 사회로부터 우리가 내면화한 도덕, 가치, 이상 같은 거예요. 완벽을 추구하고 이건 나쁜 짓이야 하는 양심의 목소리죠. 근데 중요한 건 자료에서도 강조하듯이 초자아는 기준만 제시해요. 판단하고 이래야 한다, 저건 안 된다 하고 직접 행동을 하진 않아요.
행동은 결국 자아 몫이군요.
네, 실제 행동 결정은 원초아의 욕구, 초자아의 금지, 그리고 현실이라는 이 세 가지 사이에서 필사적으로 균형점을 찾아야 하는 자아의 역할입니다.
프로이트가 마음의 층위도 나눴잖아요. 의식, 전의식, 무의식. 이건 또 어떻게 돌아가는 건가요?
네, 그 지형학적 모델이죠. 의식은 지금 우리가 딱 인지하고 있는 생각, 감정, 아주 작은 부분이에요. 전의식은 지금 당장은 생각 안 나도 예를 들어 어제 뭐 먹었지? 하면 떠오를 수 있는 기억 같은 거. 쉽게 꺼낼 수 있는 영역이죠. 그리고 가장 중요하다고 본 게 무의식인데 여긴 접근하기가 어려워요. 억압된 욕망이나 기억, 충동 같은 것들이 깊숙이 저장돼 있죠. 원초와는 통째로 무의식에 속하고요. 근데 놀랍게도 자아랑 초자아도 상당 부분 무의식적으로 작동한다는 게 핵심이에요. 이게 우리 행동에 엄청난 영향을 미치죠.
와, 그럼 이 서로 다른 힘들이 다른 의식 수준에서 막 부딪히면 갈등이 엄청나겠네요.
바로 그겁니다. 그게 내적 갈등이에요. 원초아는 당장 줘, 초자아는 절대 안 돼, 자아는 잠깐만 현실적으로 좀 이러는 거죠. 이 끊임없는 긴장이 바로 불안으로 나타나는 거고요. 자아는 이 불안감을 어떻게든 줄이려고 무의식적으로 현실을 좀 왜곡하는 전략을 써요. 그게 바로 방어기제입니다. 부인한다거나 억압한다거나 남탓, 투사를 한다거나. 그런데 이 방어기제가 좀 잘 안 먹히거나 너무 한 가지만 고집하면 불안이 해결 안 되고 계속되거나 더 심해질 수 있어요. 이게 이제 강박적인 행동, 이유 모를 불안감, 설명 안 되는 여러 심리적 증상으로 나타날 수 있다는 거죠. 자료에서도 언급하듯이요. 해결되지 않은 무의식적 갈등이 겉으로 드러나는 신호랄까요?
이야기가 정말 복잡하고 깊네요. 그런데 이렇게 오래되고 사실 비판도 만만치 않은 이론을 지금 우리가 왜 알아야 할까요? 핵심 가치가 뭘까요?
당신의 자료에서 가장 중요하게 찝는 건 이거 같아요. 이 모델이 우리 행동의 표면 너머를 보게 해준다는 거. 그러니까 왜? 라는 질문을 던지게 만들죠. 나는 왜 이러지? 저 사람은 도대체 왜 저러는 걸까? 이 질문에 대한 깊이 있는 답을 찾는 실마리를 준다는 거예요. 이걸 통해 자신과 다른 사람을 좀 더 깊이 이해하고 공감할 수 있게 되죠. 물론 과학적으로 검증하기 어렵다, 너무 성적인 거에 집착한다, 좀 문화적으로 편향됐다, 이런 비판들 분명히 있어요. 자료에서도 나오고요. 하지만 무의식이라는 개념을 처음 제대로 알렸고 심리치료의 시작점을 제공했고 또 인간 내면의 복잡한 갈등을 이해하는 틀을 제공했다는 점에서 그 영향력은 정말 대단합니다. 그리고 아이드가 그냥 라틴어로 그것이라는 뜻이라면서요? 비인격적인 힘이라는 뉘앙스? 메커니즘을 심리학에선 기제라고 번역하는 것도 흥미롭고요.
네, 오늘 프로이트 성격 이론의 정말 핵심적인 내용들을 쭉 훑어봤습니다. 자료 뒷부분에는 이 이론을 더 확장해서 사회적인 맥락이나 인생 전체 발달을 고려한 에릭 에릭슨 이론도 다음 단계로 나오더군요.
네, 그렇죠. 자, 오늘 이야기를 마무리하면서요. 당신에게 이런 질문을 한번 던져보고 싶네요. 만약에 오늘 우리가 나눈 이야기나 이 자료들처럼 우리의 많은 행동들이 있잖아요. 충동이나 불안, 심지어 도덕적인 판단까지도요. 이런 것들이 상당 부분 우리가 잘 인식하지 못하는 그런 무의식적인 힘에 의해 좌우된다면 글쎄요, 우리는 우리 자신의 행동이나 그 이유에 대해 과연 얼마만큼 의식적으로 통제하고 있다고 말할 수 있을까요?
그러게요. 그리고 그게 우리 자신에게 해당된다면 때로는 정말 이해하기 힘든 다른 사람의 행동을 볼 때 이 관점이 우리에게 뭘 생각하게 할까요? 정말 깊이 생각해 볼 만한 질문인 것 같습니다. 오늘 심층분석 함께 해주셔서 감사합니다.